This oral history of museum computing is provided by Diana Folsom and was recorded on the 2nd of April 2021 by Paul Marty and Kathy Jones.
Okay. Well, I'm kind of a quiet person, so I'm probably not as flamboyant, maybe as some of your other stories. But the way I started in the museum field was a little bit flamboyant because I met a guy on a bus in New York who happened to be the chief information officer of the LA County Museum of Art, and that's how I even first heard about working in museums and thought about the possibility. I was on a bus from JFK into the city, and the bus I was on broke down, and another bus came along. And there was only one seat left by the time I got on the bus, which was next to this very entertaining fellow, Jim Schlatter, who was brilliant and very steeped in the humanities and music, and he, sang and talked and inspired about what could be done in museums and museum technology. So we stayed in touch over the years, and my background is in the arts. I'm an artist, and my undergraduate is in an art major with music and dance minors, right? All the practical things, which I think most of us have those kinds of backgrounds who work in museums, who have a passion for the arts. And I've always continued to paint and work on my art. And so Jim and I kept in touch about art, but also because the kind of internship that I had that got me through graduate school was as an illustrator on a computer-based training program on a project. And this was in San Diego, although I went to graduate school in New York at Hunter College. When I was home in the summer in San Diego, I got this job through San Diego State, my alma mater, and as an illustrator there. So back then, we had to do our drawings on graph paper, and then the programmers would hard code it in. There weren't any easy to use Illustrator programs. So that got me started, and the consulting company was Courseware, and they were innovators in the field of computer-based training. And then after I finished graduate school and was looking for a job, I started working for them again in the art department. So I progressed kind of through the ranks, managing the art department and interacting, of course, with the instructional designers on various projects over the years, and really enjoyed it. So that was another point of conversation that Jim and I had. He would call me from LACMA to talk about what we were doing in computer-based training and educational areas there. And then a job came up, an opening. He was looking for some people who might be good trainers actually at the museum, and called me to see if I had suggestions. And I said, oh, maybe me. And Jim was of the mind that he wanted to hire people who could think a certain way and could learn. And it didn't matter whether you knew the software systems. You can always learn the systems, but you've just got to be able to have a good, maybe logical mind, be receptive. So I got the job, drove up after working all night at Courseware on a project for Apple computers, and interviewed, and it was really fun. So it was a really great department. He was very innovative and inspired me. He thought about things like linguistic programming, and he was actually developing a database, a collections management database from scratch, working with a company out of Boston, Digital Equipment Corporation. You may remember that company, DEC, from back those years ago. We had a central VAX cluster, and they were donating time and money and programmers and engaged in helping us develop this system. It was called Ladders. But it really never got finished. It's pretty difficult for museums to develop those collections management databases from scratch, although some have done so successfully, like the Chicago Art Institute. But it was a bit too much for us. So we, over the years, moved to Multimimsy. We were given Getty grants, and it was really through the Getty grant programs that we began our digitization efforts. And that's most of what I did while I was at LACMA. was worked on these at that point, really kind of blossoming, or the birth of working on digital collections. Um, I also was involved with the Amico project, and it was really the consortial projects that enabled me, and probably all of us in art museums anyway, to begin to understand and learn how to digitize our collections, how to catalog, how to do this thing. So those consortial projects, I think, are key, were key, and they continue to be key and pivotal in the progress that we make in our institutions. So, gosh, let's see. We also created our own website in about 97, I think, 1997. And I remember Kathy's story about how she created websites there I think at Harvard. And we were just, in the IT department. I was most of the time in the IT department and just sitting in the back room, and we were just retyping what we saw in either a brochure or the collections catalog, permanent collections catalog, and plunked that information online, and that was about it. And at one point, I think the colors chosen were colors to match one of the IT guy's car, so there wasn't a whole lot of thought about user experience then. It was just trying to figure out how to make a few pages, recreate a few brochure-like pages, and stick it online. So as many things begin, it was kind of quiet and just having fun together, trying things out, experimenting a bit. So we were the little elves behind them, making the magic happen. Yeah. So it seems that with all of my work in museums, I've brought my artist perspective. I am really interested in making sure that people look at the art, that it seems that I think even early on, we made our images as large as we thought we could get away with as we were pondering the size that would work on the internet and pondering the rights issues. Because I think it's just really important to be able to come back to the art object and look closely. I also really believe in collaborative work, trying to bring in educators, curators, the designers, the every aspect, the software developers, in team meetings to make our ideas and move things forward. And we usually get a much better product by talking together, but it certainly leads to messy attempts, and communications get tricky because we all have such different perspectives, but it leads to such a good product, I think. Gosh, what else to talk about? I guess
Can I jump in? Can I give a
yeah,
question real fast at this natural
good.
point? I was really intrigued by what you mentioned about Amico and the value of those
Okay,
consortial
good.
projects for, I guess, pushing boundaries. What is it you think about those consortial projects that was really so helpful?
These consortial projects, Amico was the first I was involved in. They helped us understand what the issues were and how to do things that we didn't know how to do. And there were usually so few of us in technology, even in the larger museums, that we didn't know who to talk to. And this was a way to share information, get to the experts that we would not be able to get to or pay for or even know about without these consortial projects. So Amico was the first great consortial project. Another one that I think about a lot, and it still influences my work to this day, is the Steve social tagging project. That project was fantastic. Susan Chun and Rob Stein started that project. It was groundbreaking at the time, and now looking back, probably people think that it wasn't, what's so unusual about that, but it was so radical at that point, and that really appealed to my artist side as well. So it really opened up everyone's thinking, certainly in the museum field, because we were very far behind in cataloging, particularly for subjects and themes. and content of the art that we were sharing online. And then on the opposite extreme, the opposite end of the spectrum, were the librarians and archivists who have such a formal, very careful way of cataloging and using, Library of Congress terms and a methodology that had been worked out over a long period of time. But, we in art museums have such unique objects, don't often have multiples of them. So it was much harder to standardize. Plus, I don't think that way anyway. Maybe not, and maybe some museum people do, but we are also unique in our approach to to the work we're doing. So I really loved the Steve project and was involved in part 1 and part 2, and it really stayed with me. I really liked the software that was developed by Charlie and the guys at the IMA lab, which is, I guess, now called Newfields Lab. And that really stuck with me. And so I used their utility that allows you to not only add tags, but review tags. And we tried to do that at LACMA with our docents, and it worked fairly well, but I really wanted to develop that utility further. So curiously, coming here to the Gilcrease Museum, the first project that we planned with an IMLS grant was working with some pottery that was very, very, very important collection, very important to me personally. It's ancient Mississippian and Catawban pottery that is for the Southeast tribes. And being at the Gilcrease Museum and working with Native American objects and that perspective has really allowed me to expand my thinking. And also it's allowed me to connect with my own personal heritage. So my family's from this region in Oklahoma, I'm a member of the Choctaw tribe, and I didn't know that much about my own roots. So coming here to the Gilcrease Museum has allowed me to explore. And so often the projects that I pull together are a way for me to personally explore what I want to explore, what I want to learn more about, partly because the collection's really important, but also because I'm curious. And so for that first project, we developed something called the Distance Cataloging Interface, the DCI. That's, a very sort of boring techie label, but we expanded it so that it's quite a robust utility. And we worked with Native artists and had them tag the ancient ceramic vessels. There were about a total of 3,500. And, we learned through the Steve project that even though we thought people would just love and just enjoy tagging just for the fun of it, and they would tag all of our objects and just help us get all these search terms, turned out it's fun for what, about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, unless it's a specific project, or unless maybe you pay people or they have a particular reason to get information out there about something they know about. So we did have a specific project with these Native artists who have backgrounds. Their tribes are descendants of the people who made these vessels, and we paid them. And so we had a really robust and rewarding project by using the Steve project, the things we learned there, and now applying it to work with underserved people. And so we've found that in each project we've done since then, particularly with grant-funded projects, people seem to get excited about using this distance cataloging interface. We also don't have hardly any curators in this museum. We have a deep and wide-ranging collection, a very important collection, but just a couple of curators. So we need experts to help us. So we take the approach of inviting experts, but all different kinds of experts. So we're also working on another IMLS grant project now, where we're working with ethnographic specialists and focusing on the tribes, particularly those that are in this region, the Osage, the Cherokee, and the Muskogee Creek, and working with their ethnographic materials and photographing them, identifying them, and recording information from an expert, an elder in the field who knows more about it than we do in the museum. So we're able to catalog our collection by working with this distance cataloging interface. And we're also working with another expert on the ceramic vessels who reviewed our cataloging and fixed it and added more information, more data that we did not have, which is then enabling us to have meaningful NAGPRO consultations. So this result of the Steve project is moving us forward in new and very, very important ways for the field to work with Native peoples and improve our understanding of our collection, and also to help them have a voice in what we say about these objects.
Diana, could you say a little bit more about how the interface works? I'm finding it fascinating that you developed that and that you're working with tribal elders. So my Peabody mind is kicking in, and I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay. So the software side or the
user experience side, I think. So not so much the museum as how do the experts interact with it? What is the type of training that you might have to give them in order to do the work?
Okay, yes. So again, you know, we figured that they would love to see these ancient ceramic vessels because they're related to their heritage, and each of these tribal members are ceramic artists. So it was very interesting to them on many different levels, from the iconographic layer to the methodology, the material, the shapes. They're very complex vessels. So we thought it would be, again, a little easier for them to do, but we found that we needed to give them training initially, which we did in person. We had several long meetings, and we had an advisory committee as well, and the artists were on the advisory committee, and we met together in those meetings. Actually, Holly Witchy was hired to be a facilitator for those meetings. Also, she was really great. And so we talked through many issues, and then when we got down to business, it was we felt it important to run it like a project. We had to have monthly goals, and we also found that it was important to go meet them in their homes or in a Starbucks and do additional training in person. We thought it was really easy to use, but you know, if something's new and if it's not if you're not necessarily accustomed to working with software or technology, we spent a lot of time doing that, and we made ourselves available all the time like a help desk to them. And that personal hands-on training, once they'd actually tried it for a while, going to them made a big difference. Does that help?
That's perfect. Thank you so much for that.
I was just looking to see if the tool was still on your museum website, and I couldn't find it. Is it there?
Well, it's password protected. So this is really by invitation only. And certainly we learned through the first project that a large percentage of these ceramic vessels are from a funerary context. Mm-hmm. So they're not really shown easily or readily online to the general public. But again, we are using that utility in the background, so to speak, in the password protected area to do some NAGPRO consultation with a couple of the tribes coming up soon. So, so that's been useful. And then we did just get a third IMLS grant, an IMLS CARES grant. We've gotten a brand new collection called the Eddie Faye Gates Tulsa Race Massacre collection. And Eddie Faye Gates is a woman who was key in trying to pull together oral histories of the race massacre survivors. And she's a real activist to help the community and improve the understanding in Tulsa, and even improve certainly the way Black citizens are treated, but also the way they are compensated for what happened during the race massacre. So in working on that proposal, I thought, you know, we've used that DCI in every proposal so far. Maybe people are getting tired of it, but it just seemed like people were still excited about it. So I put together a plan where we will be pairing a young person, like maybe a high school age person, and an elder from the North Tulsa community, which is the community where most of the race massacre survivors and more of a Black community in Tulsa. And they will look at photographs in this collection that we're cataloging now, and they will also look at some of the videos, the oral histories that were recorded, and they will work on tagging together. So probably the young person will help the elder use the technology a bit, and the elders will help the young person learn more about that time period and what happened and how it affected their community and their family members. So we're also talking about a new project where we might be using it with native Nahuatl speakers. So it's interesting that it's really turned into a tool that we've been using for the kinds of people in our community and in our collection and in our world who have not been heard from enough and whose voices we want to amplify. They've been underserved, I think.
Yeah, no, I love that, and boy, it speaks to the value of these tagging tools to give people the opportunity to add their voice, right? The missing the missing personal experiences, the missing backgrounds, the so many things that often get hidden by the curatorial voice, right? You can get that extra
Yes.
voice in there, right?
Yes.
And I
yes.
love the paired relationship idea for going over the Tulsa Race Massacre collection objects. I'm going to be really fascinated to see what you get from that with those conversations.
Me too. Me too. And I do want to emphasize that it's really important to pay people to do this work for you, because it is work for us. And so often Native communities, and I think probably Spanish speaking communities as well, and maybe Black communities also, people, we museum people will kind of, swoop in and want to grab all their knowledge and information, and then we'll take it back and process it and put it online or use it in our own sort of intellectual ways. But it's really important to pay them. What they're doing is important work. It's key to what we do, and to use it in more, would you call it unedited fashion, or in a more direct fashion? Maybe that would be a better word, so that we really understand their perspective. So those consortial projects, boy, they live on. They live on for a long time. So I guess.
Oh, you froze again. But if you can hear me, could we get back to talking about Amico and what that project meant to you in terms of digitizing collections? I know maybe I'm repeating things, but I think it's interesting to hear what the impact was on the museums themselves, who were the participating members of that. Yeah, just to kind of jump back to Amico, to talk a little bit about the impact of digitizing to the Amico standard and the impact that had on many museums. And the reason I'm asking is because it's something that Sam Quigley and I talked about, and it seemed that member museums had been digitizing. And then when Amico came along and people joined, it meant that there was a new standard for it, maybe in terms of the metadata that was collected, but also the quality of the image, right? Does that make sense?
Okay, yes, absolutely. So for us, we had really not started digitizing yet. So
okay.
It was brand new to us, and very helpful to have those standards and to even understand that those were issues to talk about and to understand and to learn about. So it was completely new to us, and so that enabled us to get started in a good way. Although certainly image standards evolved quickly and things changed quickly, and we're always scrambling to have the highest quality image as well as data as we move along. So it's a challenge to not want to go back and redo things while we're still on the march forward to digitize everything. We certainly, at the Gilcrease Museum, our collection size is about 400,000 things. So we have a long way to go, and we're taking a very kind of a rapid digitization approach as much as we can with in a medium-sized museum with a small staff. But boy, it's hard not to want to redo those photos already, those images. Does that help you for that question?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I know the urge to do it again and do it now when we have different technologies and tools, right? So probably can't.
You're right, right. At least not right away. Depends on the content, I guess. But so let me think. Do you have other questions for me, maybe, or maybe as a woman in technology, that's an issue that might might have some interest. Me starting in technology.
Yes, please talk about that.
Okay, very very early on. You know, even as a graduate student, it seemed fairly natural to me because it was education based, and I was pretty interested in doing anything or using any kind of utility that would help people or be education based. And I've later read some articles or stories that have the theory that women in technology are most interested in using it to make a difference in the world, to do something good in the world. And maybe we're not as interested in making something faster or bigger or more of this or that, but instead of interested in helping the world, improving the world. And I think that's what really got me hooked on digitizing collections. Love that cat. Because I really do feel that it helps the world to share art and to share music and dance and all sorts of humanities ideas and to connect them together. That's also what got me interested in the Linked Open Data Project, the American Art Consortium. That's the most recent consortium I was a part of that I think is a pivotal and important project to help understand how complicated it is and to begin to use a tool that makes it easier to link our data to lots of other kinds of information, events, and people and places to enrich our information, which I think is part of the dream, you know, part of the dream to make this important humanities and art information available to the world and help us understand each other better.
That sounds like the speech I give them in my museum informatics class.
I know, I
That's
know.
exactly what I say to the students.
Do
Right?
you?
It's about
Yeah, yeah.
making the world a better place.
I
Right?
really think it does. And, you know, I sometimes say that to some colleagues and they roll their eyes and I say, but you know what? I actually believe that. And then they usually confess that they believe it too.
No,
Another,
yeah,
okay.
go ahead. Sorry. I was
We
just going to agree with you, right? That I would never roll my eyes at that. I think that's exactly why we're here. And I mean, I think about where I grew up in East Central Illinois, right? The World Cultures Museum at the University of Illinois was the only bit within, you know, I mean, Chicago was what, 130 miles away. So I'd say within a 100-mile radius, that was it. That was the only place in that giant amount of farmland where you would see anybody who looked different from how you looked, who talked different from how you looked. You know what I mean?
Wow. Yeah, yeah.
It's the job of the museum to expand our boundaries, to remind us that we're all one shared humanity.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep, yep. I love that. I love that. I'm going to use your words too. Great. And I guess I'm thinking more about women in technology. I feel like I tended to play the role of the sort of translator or in-between person between, you know, the tech, really high tech guys and the regular staff in the museum. So, and that still, I think, is kind of the role I play. But now it's been infused at the Gilcrease Museum with my personal passions for the content and bringing in Native peoples and underserved peoples to help us change the nature of our content and what we share about our collection and change ideas about authority as you were saying that Greg Albers was talking about. So the museum and the curator we are people who have studied these works and studied these collections and have a useful perspective, but it's not the only perspective, and it didn't come from on high. So there are other critical perspectives that are equally important and sometimes maybe more important than ours.
And these new tools that we have at our disposal make it so much easier for us to collect those voices than we could have in the past. And you know, thinking about, you're talking about the value of the Steve project. I mean, I think what that really showed is how you manage the technologies to make that possible.
Yes.
It wasn't
yes,
as easy
yes.
as people thought it was going to be when that project
No,
started, right?
no, right. That's right. That's right. And even now as well, but it's still, but it can happen and it works. So, and it's enabled us to keep getting things done even during the pandemic.
So
and work
Diana,
remote. People
I,
can,
I
yeah.
want to ask about that too. So in the Steve project and then with your the cataloging interface, how did you get people to think about what terms they wanted to use? With Steve, it might have been easier. You know, I remember the, you know, website interface and what you were asking, but if you could say how that helped you with working with the Native American groups, um, just to find the right terminology.
Yes, and that definitely evolved. And with the first project with the Native artists, again, I still thought, even with our experience on the Steve project, I still thought that people would kind of naturally find this interesting and could think about adding tags and search terms the way we might think of them. And I felt that the perspective I wanted to learn from was, you know, what words would they use to find these objects? What would they need to find these objects? The anthropologists who had already cataloged them used terms that don't make any logical sense whatsoever most of the time to someone who hasn't been exposed to them, as I'm sure you probably found at your museum. So, but they did wonder where to start. I had been using in the past just this kind of who, what, when, where as sort of basics. You know, tell me what you see. You know, is there a tree in the painting? Is there, you know, what is the iconographic element that you see? What is the material you see? Does it show that it was pit fired so you can see the smoke rings on the ceramic vessel? What is the shape? How would you describe the shape? But the it still was difficult for them to start. So what we ended up doing was on my Digi team, we brainstormed kind of in the background, and we looked up the names of some various animals that you would see in iconography, and we also just came up with basic shapes: a triangle, a circle, you know, a line, a crosshatch that would describe what you see, and we would come up with nature words. So I made up these different columns, you know, nature words, animal words, shape words, and so we made this big kind of long vocabulary chart with all the possibilities that I thought that myself as an artist, what I might want to look for. We looked up terms for that clay makers would use, you know, when they're talking about how they work on their art and their craft. And so, and also we looked at art historical terms, which weren't really used by the anthropologists, which is the way it's been cataloged a bit so far. So we ended up with this kind of long vocabulary and a chart that we then had an in-person committee meeting, like an advisory committee meeting, all the artists, and Holly Witchy was the wonderful facilitator. And we basically went through every term and they voted whether they would want to use those terms or not. So we kind of developed our own little folksonomy. And we also learned that Native peoples do not like it when we give a regular animal name to something that they see depicted on this ancient ceramic vessel, because it's something that they may have seen in ceremony, and it's not necessarily a regular kind of an animal, or you wouldn't call it a hybrid of, you know, a dog plus a dragon or something, because it's something very different. So we learned a lot from that, and that's how we came up with the vocabulary of terms. Is that helpful?
That's wonderful. Thank you.
And if I'm not sure that it's, certainly it's not a sort of exhaustive, and we found that they still tended to use a fairly limited range of terms. And one of the most important things they got out of it was that this enabled them to look. And maybe that's what you're referring to when you were referring to the VTS methods. It just helped them really look at these objects more closely, more carefully, and consider their ancestors who made them, you know, before their time, and what we could learn. This was a lost art, which you may know, until maybe, you know, 10, 15 years ago. A few artists, one of them is Jerry Redcorn, began studying collections in museums and started experimenting to figure out how to recreate those old ways, how to make the ceramic vessels. And so it was really through these museum collections that this has been revived, and it's now becoming more and more popular in our region, certainly in Oklahoma. And it has also become a way for Native peoples to to add to their income. So, so that's very important as well. And Native peoples see these items as living things. I hate to even use the word objects or items to refer to the work of art itself. Even describing it as a work of art seems incomplete, but they are living things. Native peoples can feel that their ancestors made them and touched them, and there's deep, deep personal meaning. So these artists got so much joy, had so many new ideas. There was such creativity and beautiful range of work in these ceramic vessels. And then we've ended up purchasing some work from these contemporary artists for our collection as well, that give more modern, I don't know if modern is the right word, but more contemporary versions or even interpretations of these ancient techniques. So I'm really, really happy to have played a small role in helping to move this art form forward.